Okay, people, we have here a pilot light with a lot of nozzles that put out a lot of BTUs, and you're wondering what this is all about. Well, it's all about something we all love, which is beer.
Of course.
And here now we welcome Steve of Riverwalk Brewing.
Yes.
And what we have here is basically a pilot system.
Yeah, this system is something that I put together to kind of serve as our R&D lab for the brewery that we're starting up, to give us a way to test out different kinds of beers, different batches of beers on a smaller scale. So when we do scale up, we know what we're making basically. And a lot of the features that we'll find in this home brewery are very similar to the ones that you'd find in a much larger scale brewery, just on a more practical scale for backyard brewing, which is what we're doing here today.
All right, so the first thing, we'll give an overview shot of this thing. So basically we have 3 burners and 3 containers or kegs, which actually have the tops cut out.
Yeah, these are old kegs that we cut the tops off and we use as kettles because they actually make great kettles. They're made of stainless steel, which is perfect, and they have these lips around the bottom of them, which help to trap the heat and really keep them at the temperature that they need to be at.
All right, so let's start talking about temperature. Let's start over here because this piece of equipment here is actually sort of the part of the control module to it all, and it looks to be like some kind of a VCR, but yet it has some additions that look like a wall switch and some digital readouts. What's going on here, Steve?
Well, this you're absolutely correct. This is a former piece of consumer electronics that I have repurposed into the control panel for our brewery here. Why go out and buy a fancy case when you can just rip the guts out of a VCR? And what I've done here is you're absolutely correct. There's a couple of wall switches that are used to control the pumps that we have for the brewery. But the real sort of brains of this operation are these 2 temperature controllers. And these are pretty feature-filled for their small size. They're fancy thermostats, basically, and I don't know if you can see the readouts on them, but what they do is they allow me to control the temperature on the liquids that we have involved in the brewery automatically. So I can just set the temperatures on these, leave it, and kind of walk away and let them do what they need to do. And that's great, especially for this pilot brewing system, because we want to be able to repeat over and over again the same parameters. We want to be able to adjust our parameters and make sure that we have things, just where we want them. So these things are great. They're very programmable. You can make them do a lot of different things. And the way that we have them set up on this particular system is they actually control solenoids, which you can see back here. There's 1, 2. And these solenoids are hooked up to our propane source. And what happens is the temperature controller senses when the temperature has gotten down below where it wants to be, and it opens up the solenoid and releases propane gas to our burners. The burners kick on. When the temperature gets up to where it wants to be, the solenoid shuts down. And I'll show you how this works actually right now.
Yeah.
I'll light up one of our pilot lights, which is actually just a pretty simple piece of copper tubing with a crimp on the end. I'm working with the pilot setup right now. You might see a little more flame than you'd expect out of these, but you can dial them down so they're a little bit more reasonable. So now that we have our pilot lit, that stays lit during the whole brew session, assuming it doesn't get too windy, which looks like it might here. But I will now tell this. Basically, I'm going to tell this burner that it wants to turn on with my temperature controller. So I'm going to go to my set point. I'm going to tell it that it wants to be about 90 degrees. And as soon as I do that...
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, well you probably can't see it on the video, but because it's such a clean burn and hot burn,
Yeah.
that it's blue or non-existent. But I wouldn't want to get too much closer. How many BTUs do you think you're putting out there?
These should put out about 90,000 BTUs, which is it's enough to keep things boiling pretty quickly. I actually had to adjust had to adjust some of my calculations because I was boiling off so much liquid during the brewing process that I ended up with a lot less than I thought I would. So now I have to, basically top off with some extra liquid because I know I'm going to boil down almost, 2 gallons over the course of an hour.
And how about cooking lobster on those?
I haven't tried that yet, but I'm sure it's possible. Maybe we'll get something worked out. We can do beer and lobster. I wouldn't want to use the same pots for the lobster as I do for the beer.
Right.
But I'm sure it would be doable. Obviously, there's enough heat.
Okay. All right. So we got this thing cranked up. So
Yeah.
these 3 canisters in a row, you were just explaining to me before we got this thing on, they don't do the same thing. It's kind of there's a series of events that happens in each canister.
That's right. I'm actually going to turn this off, and I will explain to you what happens. I'll shut down our valves here for safety as well when we're not using these. The process in brewing, it's really fairly simple. It's been the same way for thousands of years. So we just, we make it a little bit more complicated because we want to be able to do different things. But really, the initial process is to take crushed barley that we've mixed with hot water, and we put it in this container right here. And that, that sits at about 150 degrees for about an hour. And we're able to control the temperature on that, and we actually use these pumps to recirculate that liquid in there to make sure that we've got a consistent temperature. That is how we get the sugars that we want for our beer. Once we've let that sit for a while, we run off the liquid, which is called wort. We run the wort off from this kettle into our boil kettle. And again, we use our pumps for that. And at the same time, we have another kettle that sits right here that's full of hot water. And the hot water comes in, goes through our pump, and rinses out more of the sugar from our grain, and we run that out right into here. So we're basically just trying to get as much sugar out of that grain as we can, and running that off into our boil kettle. And once we've got, enough water, or enough wort, I should say, into our boil kettle, at that point we start boiling. And we boil a beer for typically about an hour to an hour and a half. And at that point, that's when the hops go in. The hops give you that great that bitterness or that, floral aroma and taste. And I love hops. Hops are a great thing. But that's where we get our hops in the mix. And then at that point, we're done boiling, and we have our wort that's sitting there at about 212 degrees. We need to chill that down to about room temperature. And I don't have my chiller; it's actually upstairs. But there's a little block of metal that sits right here, and we're able to run this wort through that block of metal, and it's got some channels on each side of it where we can run cold water in, and we can run our hot wort in, and they basically act as a heat exchanger and allows us to cool that wort down to about 65-70 degrees, just like that. So we run that out through the chiller into our fermenter. At that point, we add the yeast, close it up, and let the yeast go to work. And a couple weeks later, you've got beer.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Steve.
Absolutely.
It's been fascinating. And you were part of building this contraption, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I can't take credit for the initial design. I actually adapted a design from somebody else, but a friend of mine helped me weld up the stand. We welded the stand. I put together all of the gas, the plumbing, the electronics, the brains, and I think in future episodes here we will look at how you might build something like this, or maybe something a little simpler, and also my kegerator, which I think
we're going to get to that next.
Excellent.
All right, Steve, thanks a lot. This is Steve from Riverwalk Brewing.
Thank you.
And shooting a little video for Dover Projects.
Great.